Edward Crane's hand cracked across her face so hard the sound echoed off the terminal walls. And not one person moved. Victoria Sterling, CEO of a billion-dollar medical empire, was on the floor of Denver International Airport, bleeding, crawling, begging a man who wore cruelty like a tailored suit to just stop. Nobody stopped him. But then, a little girl in pigtails tugged her father's sleeve and asked 4 words that changed everything. What those 4 words were, and what happened next, is something you will not see coming. Drop the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The slap came without warning. 1 second, Victoria Sterling was standing at gate B42, her briefcase in her lap, her eyes on her phone, running through the merger documents she'd read 17 times already. And the next second, her world tilted sideways, and her cheek exploded in white-hot pain. The impact knocked her clean out of her wheelchair. She hit the floor hard, her left shoulder taking the brunt of it, her phone skidding across the polished tile, her briefcase spilling open and sending papers fanning out across the terminal floor like a deck of cards thrown in frustration. Her legs, the legs that had not obeyed a single command her brain sent in 11 years, lay twisted beneath her at an angle that looked wrong to anyone who saw it. She didn't feel them. She never felt them. But she felt her face. "Did you think," Edward Crane said, standing over her, his voice low and deliberate, and somehow worse for being quiet, "that you could just walk away from this deal?" He paused. Let the word hang there. Walk. He knew exactly what he'd said. Victoria pressed her palm to the floor. The tile was cold. She could taste copper, the sharp metallic bite of blood from where her lip had split against the edge of her own teeth. Around her, the terminal continued its indifferent hum. A flight attendant rolled a carry-on past without breaking stride. A man in a business suit glanced over, then looked back at his phone. Someone, and this was the part that would stay with her long after the bruises faded. Someone laughed. A short, startled sound, quickly swallowed. And then she heard the unmistakable sound of a phone camera clicking on. Not to call for help, to record. "Edward." Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "You need to walk away, right now." He crouched down to her level. She could smell his cologne. Expensive, suffocating, the kind that announced its presence 3 steps before the man wearing it did. His eyes were pale and flat. The eyes of a man who had spent so many years calculating the worth of everything that he had long ago stopped seeing people as people. "I need to walk away?" He tilted his head like she'd said something genuinely amusing. "Victoria, you're on the floor." "I'm aware of where I am." "Then you understand your position." She pushed herself upright, trying to get her arms beneath her, trying to reach the wheelchair that had landed on its side 2 feet away. Her fingers found the frame. She pulled. Edward's shoe came down on her wrist. Not stomping, not crushing, just resting there. A deliberate, quiet pressure. A reminder. "The Hargrove merger," he said pleasantly, as if they were discussing golf. "You signed the terms we agreed on, all of them, and this stays between us. You walk back to your little company, you smile for the shareholders, and nobody has to know that the great Victoria Sterling spent an afternoon on the floor of Denver International." She looked up at him. 11 years in a wheelchair had taught her things that standing people never learned. It had taught her that the world was designed to make her feel small. That men like Edward Crane looked at a woman who couldn't stand up and saw an opportunity. It had taught her to harden everything inside herself into something they couldn't touch. But right now, on the cold floor of Gate B42, with her lip bleeding and her papers scattered, and the low whir of phone cameras surrounding her, right now she felt something she hadn't felt since the night of the accident. She felt afraid. "Get your foot off my hand," she said quietly. "Sign the 'Get your foot off my hand,' Edward." Something moved at the edge of her vision. He wasn't a large man, exactly. He wasn't the kind of man you looked at and immediately thought, danger. Not the way you might think it about someone with size or swagger or obvious threat. He was maybe 6'1", lean, with dark hair going salt and pepper at the temples, and the kind of face that had been weathered by something more than just years. He wore jeans that had seen real work and boots that had earned their scuffs. A gray Henley. No jacket, even though it was February in Denver. He was holding a little girl's hand. She was maybe 5 or 6, with her father's dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, and a purple backpack shaped like a turtle on her back. She was staring at the scene on the floor with wide, serious eyes. The man had been walking past gate B38. He'd had no reason to stop. He had a flight to catch and a kid to manage, and probably 10 other things on his mind that had nothing to do with a confrontation that wasn't his business. He stopped. His daughter tugged his hand. "Daddy?" she said. Her voice was small but clear, cutting through the ambient noise with a particular precision that children's voices have. "Why is that man hurting the lady in the chair?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't dramatic. It was the most honest question in the building, asked by the only person in a crowd of dozens who apparently still needed an answer to it. The man looked down at his daughter. Then he looked up at Edward Crane. Then he looked at Victoria on the floor, her hand pinned, her lip bleeding, her dignity being dismantled, one quiet word at a time. He let go of his daughter's hand. "Sophie," he said, "stay right here." His voice was calm. Not calm the way someone is calm when nothing is wrong. Calm the way deep water is calm, still on the surface, with everything happening underneath. "Hey." He walked directly toward Edward. Not fast, not slow. Direct. The kind of walk that had a destination and knew it. "Step back from her." Edward straightened up and turned, and for a half-second his expression cycled through genuine surprise before it settled back into contempt. He looked Cole up and down, the way men like Edward Crane always looked at men they'd already decided didn't matter. "This is a private conversation," Edward said. "No," Cole said. "A private conversation is 2 people talking. This is 1 person on the floor and another person standing on her hand." He stopped about 4 feet away, close enough that Edward had to look at him, far enough that nothing about his posture could be read as aggression. "So I'll say it again. Step back from her." "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I don't care who you are." Edward blinked. People cared who he was. That was the entire architecture of his world, that people knew who he was, what he could do, who he knew, what he controlled. The casual indifference in Cole's voice hit him like something foreign and hard to process. "I could make 1 phone call," Edward said, recovering, "and whatever you do for a living, what is it, landscaping, would be over by tomorrow morning." Cole looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger exactly. More like recognition. Like he was categorizing something. "You're done here," Cole said. "Walk away." "Or what?" Edward's voice had an edge now. "You going to hit me? In the middle of a crowded airport? In front of all these cameras?" He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Please, go ahead. I'll own whatever garage you work in before the day is out." Cole said nothing. He just stood there, looking at Edward with those steady, quiet eyes. And the thing that started to unnerve Edward, though he would never have admitted it, was that the man didn't look angry. He looked patient, like he had stood in worse places than this and waited out worse men than Edward Crane, and he had all the time in the world. Edward glanced around at the crowd, at the phone still recording, at the picture he was making, a man in a $2,000 suit, standing over a woman in a wheelchair on the floor, while a stranger in work boots stared him down. He straightened his jacket. "This isn't over," he said to Victoria. "Think very carefully before your next move." Then he turned and walked away, his shoes clicking on the tile, the crowd parting for him with the automatic deference that expensive things always commanded. Cole watched him go until he was past the security checkpoint. Then he turned and crouched down next to Victoria. "Can I help you up?" Up close, she could see his eyes were a dark, steady brown. There were lines at the corners that hadn't come from laughing. He smelled like motor oil and something clean, like cedar. His hands, when he reached toward her wheelchair to right it, were the hands of someone who used them for real things. "I can manage," she said automatically. It was what she always said. He didn't argue. He didn't insist. He just held the wheelchair steady while she maneuvered herself into it, with the practiced efficiency of 11 years of practice. The pivot, the push, the weight shift, the lift. And when she was seated, he let go and stood up. "Your papers," he said. And before she could respond, he was already gathering them from the floor, collecting them without looking at them, without making a single comment about the Hargrove medical letterhead, or the merger agreements, or any of it. He just stacked them and handed them back. "Thank you," she said. "Are you okay?" The question was direct. No inflation, no performance. He wasn't asking it to have something to say. He actually wanted to know. "I'm fine." He looked at her lip. "That needs ice," he said. "I said I'm fine." "Okay." He didn't push. He looked back at the crowd, which had mostly dispersed now that the spectacle was over. Phones going back into pockets, conversations resuming. The easy, collective amnesia of people who had witnessed something uncomfortable and chosen not to carry it with them. "Sophie." He turned, and his daughter materialized from her spot by the gate chairs, with the immediate, obedient response of a child who had been raised to come when called. She walked up to her father's side and looked at Victoria with large, solemn eyes. "Hi," Victoria said. She didn't know what else to say to small children. She never did. "Hi," said Sophie. Then, with the unfiltered directness of 6-year-olds everywhere, "Your mouth is bleeding." "Sophie," Cole said. "I'm just saying what I see." "I know." He looked faintly amused, despite himself. That's the problem. Victoria found herself doing something she hadn't expected. She almost smiled. "She's right," Victoria said. "It is." Sophie considered this with great seriousness. Then she unzipped the front pocket of her turtle backpack and produced, with the gravity of someone presenting a state document, a small travel pack of tissues. "My daddy always keeps these for me," she said. "But you need them more right now." Victoria took them. "Thank you, Sophie." The girl nodded, satisfied, as if the matter was settled. Cole's flight had been to Chicago, a supply run for parts, something he needed by Monday morning for a job that couldn't wait. But Chicago was gone now. He'd stood in line at the rebooking counter for 20 minutes before he let himself acknowledge what he already knew, which was that he wasn't going to leave an injured woman alone in an airport because he had a deadline. It wasn't a complicated decision. It didn't feel heroic. It just felt like what you did. He told Victoria this in the most matter-of-fact way possible, which she immediately resisted. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know. I'm perfectly capable of—" "I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "Do you have someone picking you up?" She was quiet for a moment. "I was flying out," she said. "I wasn't going home. I was going to New York. For the merger meeting." "Do you still want to go to New York?" She thought about Edward's face when he'd pressed his foot onto her wrist. The way he'd said "walk" and paused, just long enough to make sure she understood he'd done it on purpose. "No," she said. "Okay. Is there someone in Denver who can come get you?" She went through the mental list of names. Her assistant, Diane, who answered to the board as much as to her. Her VP of operations, Marcus, who had been in 3 of the last 4 meetings where Edward had been present and had said nothing while Edward talked over her. The corporate driver, whose loyalty she'd never had reason to test, but didn't feel like testing now. "No," she said again, quietly. Cole looked at his daughter, who was sitting in the chair beside Victoria's wheelchair, eating the last of her animal crackers with complete contentment. "We have a spare room," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's a real bed, and Sophie makes good hot chocolate. If you need somewhere to land tonight." Victoria opened her mouth to say no. She had said no to every offered hand for 11 years. She had built an entire empire on the architecture of no. "No, I don't need help. No, I don't need accommodations. No, I am not what you think I am. No, I will not let you see the cost of all of this." She looked at her split lip in the reflection of her phone screen. She looked at the empty terminal around her, the indifferent crowd, the space where 30 people had filmed a man assault her without intervening. She looked at Sophie, who had finished her animal crackers and was now carefully folding the empty bag into a perfect small square for the trash. "Hot chocolate," Victoria said. Sophie looked up. "With marshmallows?" "Sophie, it's a fair question, Daddy. Some people use the little ones, and some people use the big ones, and those are 2 completely different hot chocolates." Victoria looked at Cole. Cole looked back at her, with the expression of a man who had long ago surrendered to the reality that his daughter was several levels smarter than him, and had decided to make peace with it. "Big ones," Victoria said. Sophie nodded. "Okay." She stood up and shouldered her turtle backpack. "Then you can come." The drive to Cole's house took 40 minutes through the gray February afternoon, the city giving way to the quieter, wider streets of a neighborhood that hadn't been developed by anyone with a vision board. The houses were real houses, driveways with oil stains, front yards that had seen sleds, garages with the door left open to reveal the kind of organized chaos that meant someone actually used the space. Cole drove a truck that was old enough to have earned its rust and big enough to carry things that mattered. Sophie sat in the back seat and asked Victoria approximately 47 questions about her wheelchair, all of which Victoria answered with more patience than she'd shown anyone in years. "Does it have a motor?" "No, this one doesn't. Some do." "Can you make it go fast?" "Yes." "How fast?" "Fast enough." "Faster than running?" "Probably not, but faster than you'd think. My friend Jalen has a grandpa with one of those scooters." "Is that the same?" "Different category, but related concept." "Do you ever wish it had a horn?" Victoria had paused at that one. She'd had the thought once or twice, she admitted. Sophie found this hilarious. Cole drove and said nothing, and let his daughter do what his daughter did, which was build a bridge to a stranger entirely out of genuine curiosity and no performance whatsoever. He had stopped trying to manage it years ago. He'd learned that Sophie's instincts about people were better than his own. The house was small. It was clean in the way that a single parent's house is clean, not spotless, but honest. A pair of small snow boots by the door. A drawing on the refrigerator that was clearly meant to be a dog, or possibly a horse. A kitchen table that had real meals eaten at it. Victoria sat at that table while Cole got the ice for her lip, and Sophie got up on the step stool to reach the hot chocolate packets. "You don't have to fuss," Victoria said. "I'm not fussing," Cole said. He set the ice pack, a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel, on the table in front of her. "I'm doing what needs doing. That's different." She picked up the ice pack and pressed it to her lip, and looked at him across the table. He had sat down across from her with a glass of water, not hovering, not performing concern, just present. "You didn't have to step in," she said. "No. Most people didn't." "I know." "Why did you?" He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. She'd learned to read the difference between a person who was avoiding a question and a person who was taking it seriously. He was taking it seriously. "Because Sophie asked me why no one was doing anything," he said. "And I didn't want to have an answer for that." Victoria turned that over. "That's it?" "That's it." "Not because—" She stopped herself. She'd been about to say, "Not because you wanted something." She'd been about to run the calculation she always ran, the one that had been installed in her by 15 years of corporate warfare and the particular education of being a woman in a wheelchair in rooms full of men who smiled too much. "Not because I wanted something," Cole said, completing the sentence she hadn't said. Not accusatory, just accurate. She looked at him. "Sorry," she said. "You don't have to be." He took a drink of water. "You've probably learned that for good reason." "Hot chocolate's ready," Sophie announced. The mug she placed in front of Victoria had 6 marshmallows in it. Victoria counted them. 6. She didn't know why that made her eyes sting. She blinked it back, that sting, the way she blinked everything back, the way she had trained herself to never let the thing behind the wall come to the wall. She pressed the ice pack harder against her lip. "Thank you, Sophie," she said. Sophie climbed into her chair with her own mug. "You're welcome," she said. Then, very seriously, "You should stay for dinner, too. Daddy makes really good spaghetti when he's not too tired. And I don't think today was the kind of day you should be alone." Victoria looked at the 6 marshmallows floating in her hot chocolate. She thought about the terminal, the clicking phones, Edward's shoe on her wrist, the flight she didn't take to a meeting she dreaded for 6 months. She thought about 30 years of building something her father had handed her and calling it her own. About the board meetings where she'd had to be 3 times as prepared and twice as ruthless to hold the room. About the nights she'd spent in hotel rooms with contracts instead of people, because contracts were the only thing she'd ever learned to fully trust. She thought about what it cost. She thought about what it had bought. "Spaghetti sounds good," she said. Later, after dinner, after Sophie had been tucked in with a turtle backpack hung on the bedpost, and the nightlight, shaped like the moon, switched on, Cole came back to the kitchen and found Victoria sitting at the table with the merger documents spread out in front of her, her reading glasses on, her jaw set. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her. He sat down. For a while, neither of them said anything. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet late at night. Not empty, but settled. Real. "He's going to come back," Victoria said finally. "I know." That wasn't a tantrum. That was a warning shot. She stared at the documents without reading them. Edward Crane has been building toward this for 2 years. He wants the merger. He wants the Hargrove Medical Data Network. And he wants me out of the company before it closes, so the new board doesn't have anyone who knows what he did. What did he do? She looked up. Cole met her eyes evenly. He wasn't leaning forward with hungry curiosity. He wasn't cataloging information. He was asking because she'd offered a thread, and he was willing to follow it, if she wanted to pull it. "He embezzled," she said. "Clean and slow, over 4 years. Small enough that no one audit would catch it. But I saw the pattern." She tapped the documents. "It's all in here, or enough of it to start." Cole nodded slowly. "And if you don't sign the merger on his terms?" "He destroys me publicly. He's got 4 board members. He's got a story about me that's half true and entirely constructed to be the worst version of every real thing." She took off her glasses. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with today. "He's been building the narrative for a year. My instability, my erratic judgment, the fact that I haven't named a successor, the fact that I've been fighting him at every turn." She paused. "He'll make it look like I'm the problem." "Are you?" She looked at him sharply. "That's a direct question." "It is." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly in the street. "I've made mistakes," she said finally. "I've been hard in ways that weren't always necessary. And I've trusted the company more than I've trusted people, and I've—" She stopped, started again. "The company my father built was supposed to help people. Medical systems, diagnostics, access for people who didn't have it. That's what it was." Her voice was level, but only barely. "What it became is something else. Something I helped it become. Because I was so busy holding it that I stopped asking whether I should." The silence after that had weight to it. Cole drank his coffee. "You could still turn it back," he said. "You don't know what you're talking about." "You're right. I don't know corporate medicine." But I know what it looks like when someone knows exactly what they should do and is terrified to do it." She stared at him. I'm not saying you're weak. I'm saying you're human." He held her gaze. "There's a difference." Victoria Sterling, who had held rooms of hostile men, who had navigated 11 years in a chair through a world that had not been built for her, who had buried her father and run his company and fought for every inch of every room she'd ever been in, felt something inside her chest do something unfamiliar. It cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. She looked back down at the documents. "I need to think," she said. "Take your time." "You don't have time. You have a job to get back to and a daughter to—" "Victoria." She stopped. "Take your time," he said again. She put her glasses back on. She looked at the numbers she'd been carrying for 2 years. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't look at them alone. She didn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. Victoria hadn't slept more than 5 consecutive hours since her father's funeral. And that night she'd been running on scotch and adrenaline, and the particular exhaustion that comes from holding your face together in front of 200 people who are watching to see if you'll crack. Sleep was a thing she scheduled like a conference call, carved out of the day, rationed, never entirely trusted. But tonight was different. Tonight she lay in Cole's spare room, in a bed that was too soft and smelled like cedar and laundry detergent. And she stared at the ceiling and felt the day move through her the way a fever moves, in waves, in images, in the involuntary replay of things she would have preferred to forget. Edward's hand, the cold tile, the sound of 30 phones clicking on. She pressed 2 fingers against her lip. The swelling had gone down with the ice, but there was still a tenderness there, a reminder that lived in the body longer than the mind wanted to hold it. She'd spent 11 years learning to separate the pain her body knew from the story her mind told about it. The wheelchair had been the first lesson. Chronic pain was the graduate course. She had become, over time, someone who could acknowledge damage without dramatizing it. But lying in the dark in a stranger's house, she let herself feel it. not the lip, not even the wrist where Edward's shoe had rested with its quiet, calculated pressure. The other thing. The thing under all of it. She'd been afraid, actually afraid. Not the managed, operational fear she used as fuel in board meetings, the kind that sharpened her and kept her looking for angles. This had been something older, something that lived below language and strategy. The kind of fear a person feels when they suddenly understand that the other person has decided the rules don't apply to them, and the crowd around them has silently agreed. She hadn't felt that since the night of the accident. She didn't like what it told her about how far things had gone. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 3:14 a.m. She opened her email out of habit and then closed it again. She opened the merger documents she'd photographed and then closed those too. She set the phone face down and lay there in the too-soft bed and listened to the house breathe. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Sophie cough once in her sleep and then go quiet. Strange, Victoria thought, how a sound that small could make a house feel less empty. She didn't sleep, but somewhere around 4 in the morning, she stopped fighting the fact that she wasn't sleeping. And that was almost the same thing. By 6:15, she was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a legal pad beside it, covered in 2 columns of handwriting. Names in one column, corresponding pieces of information in the other. She'd been building this list in her head for 14 months. Getting it out of her head and onto paper felt like lancing something. She heard Cole's footsteps before she saw him. Quiet, deliberate. The footfall of someone trained not to announce themselves, who had learned to move through space with minimal disruption. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in a gray t-shirt and jeans, already dressed, his hair still damp at the temples. He looked at her at the table with her laptop and her legal pad, and the exhaustion she'd stopped trying to hide. And he didn't say, "You didn't sleep," or "You should have rested." He just went to the coffee maker. "How do you take it?" he said. "Black." He poured 2 cups and brought them to the table and sat down across from her the same way he had the night before. Present, unhurried, taking up exactly the space he needed and not 1 inch more. "What are you building?" he asked, nodding at the legal pad. "A timeline." She turned it so he could see without making a ceremony of it. Edward started making moves 14 months ago, small ones at first, positioning himself with the board, cultivating relationships with Hargrove's people, feeding stories to the right financial journalists. Nothing you could point to directly, but a pattern. Cole looked at the list. He read carefully, the way people read when they're actually absorbing, rather than just moving their eyes. "He got to Whitmore first," he said, pointing to the name at the top of the 2nd column. "Your board member." "Arthur Whitmore, yes. Arthur is old money and old fear. He's terrified of the company looking unstable to institutional investors. And Edward told him exactly the right story about what happens if I stay in the CEO seat through the merger." She picked up her coffee. "Arthur is a follower, not a strategist. He goes wherever the wind feels safest. Edward made himself the wind." "And these 3? Chen, Patel, and Rivera. Different angles. Chen has a son who works for one of Edward's subsidiaries. Patel has a political ambition that Edward has been quietly funding. Rivera," she paused. "Rivera I don't fully understand yet. He's the one who worries me, because I can't see the lever." "Every man has a lever," Cole said. She looked at him. "That sounds like something learned," she said. "It is." He didn't elaborate immediately, and she didn't push. Then he said, "When you spend time in environments where trust is the difference between coming home and not, you learn to read people, what they want, what they're afraid of losing. Those are the 2 anchors. Edward's using both." "You're talking about the Navy." He was quiet for a moment. "Sophie mentioned it," Victoria said, "last night. She said you were a Navy SEAL. She said it the same way she mentions that you make good spaghetti, like it's just a fact about you. Kids don't have a hierarchy of information, Cole said. Everything's equal weight until someone teaches them otherwise. He drank his coffee. Yeah, 12 years. Special operations. And then? And then Maya got sick. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it. A tectonic thing, deep and settled, and too large to be moved, but also too large to be ignored. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when Sophie was 18 months old. I got out, came home. We had 2 years. Victoria didn't say I'm sorry. She'd had I'm sorry said to her enough times after the accident to understand that it was usually what people said when they didn't know what else to say and needed to say something. She held the silence instead and let it be what it was. Sophie was 3.5 when Maya died, Cole said. She doesn't remember much, but she remembers enough. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The garage was Maya's father's. He left it to us. I'd worked on engines my whole life. It's the kind of thing you just know, like some people know languages. It made sense. From Navy SEAL to mechanic. From 12 years of operating in the dark, making impossible calls, losing people, to something I could do with my hands in the light. He met her eyes. Best decision I ever made. Second best. What's the second? Going back for Sophie's goldfish when she left it at the airport in a bag during our layover in Atlanta last March. A beat. We missed our connection. She was devastated about the fish. I got the fish. Victoria stared at him. You went back through security for a goldfish? His name is Gerald. Of course it is. Gerald is doing well. Thank you for asking. She felt it again, that almost smile, the one she hadn't used in so long that the muscles for it felt uncertain. She pressed her mouth against it. Cole watched her do that. He didn't comment on it. You're going to fight him, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm building the case, she said, looking back at the legal pad. I've had 2 years to build it. I just never... She stopped. Never had reason to pull the trigger. Never had... She stopped again. She picked up the pen, put it down. I was afraid of what happened if I did. If I go to the board with embezzlement evidence, and 4 of the 7 members are in Edward's pocket, I don't have the votes. The story becomes, I'm a destabilized CEO, making wild accusations against a potential merger partner. He's been setting that up for a year. I pull the trigger too early. I lose everything. And if you wait too long, he signs the merger around me, forces me out. The evidence disappears with his access to the internal systems. She pressed her fingertips flat on the table. I've been waiting for the right moment for 14 months. And instead, I ended up on the floor of gate B42 because I miscalculated how far he'd gone. Cole was quiet for a moment. You didn't miscalculate, he said. He escalated. That's different. Miscalculation means you missed something you should have seen. Escalation means he crossed a line he'd been keeping himself from crossing. Something changed for him. She looked up. What do you mean? The timing. You said you were heading to New York for the merger meeting. Monday. Final terms. Is there a deadline on the merger? She was still, her eyes sharpened. The Hargrove board has a fiduciary trigger, she said slowly. If the merger isn't finalized by the 15th, they have the option to walk and take an alternative offer from Meridian Capital. And today is February 7th. 8 days, Cole said. The word landed in her chest like a stone into still water. 8 days. That was why Edward had been at the airport. That was why he hadn't waited, hadn't been careful, hadn't calculated the optics of assaulting a woman in a wheelchair in a crowded terminal. He wasn't patient enough anymore. The timeline had closed around him, and he'd gotten sloppy. Sloppy meant desperate. Desperate meant he didn't have it as locked up as he wanted her to believe. "He doesn't have Rivera," she said. Cole waited. If he had all 4 votes secured, he wouldn't have needed to threaten me at the airport. He would have let the merger proceed and dealt with me afterward. He threatened me because he still needs my signature, which means something isn't locked. She pulled the legal pad toward her and circled Rivera's name. Daniel Rivera. He's been on my board for 6 years. I appointed him. We haven't spoken in 8 months because Edward made it politically useful for Rivera to keep his distance from me. She looked up. If Edward doesn't have him fully committed, then you do. Then I might. Cole stood up. He went to the refrigerator and came back with 2 eggs and a pan and started making breakfast the same way he did everything. Without announcement, without performance, just doing what needed doing. She watched him for a moment. "You're not going to tell me to be careful," she said, "or to let someone else handle it." "Would that help?" "No." "Then why would I say it?" He cracked an egg. "You've been running a billion-dollar company from a wheelchair since you were 32 years old. I think you know how to be careful." "Most people assume the chair means I need managing." "Most people are bad at reading what's in front of them." She was quiet for a moment. "My father used to say I was the most capable person in any room I entered," she said. He said it like it was a compliment. It took me a long time to understand it was also a burden. Because the more capable you are, the more people expect you to carry, and the less they notice the weight of it. "Sounds like he knew you well." "He knew what I could do. That's different from knowing me." She looked at her hands. "He built the company. He ran it for 30 years. When he handed it to me, he said, 'Victoria, this company is your inheritance, and your purpose, and your identity.' And I believed him. I believed it so completely that I stopped knowing where the company ended and I began." She paused. "He died 4 years ago, and I realized at the funeral that the grief I felt was complicated. Because part of what I was grieving wasn't him. It was the version of me that had existed in relation to him, the one who was always proving something." Cole slid a plate in front of her. Eggs and toast. Simple. Real. The kind of food that didn't have an agenda. "Who are you when you're not proving something?" he asked. The question hit her somewhere undefended. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked at the plate. She picked up the fork. "I don't know," she said. "I'm starting to think that's the problem." They ate in a silence that was, somehow, not uncomfortable. Then Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, in SpongeBob pajamas. Her dark hair exploded from its pigtails overnight into something that could charitably be called creative. Her turtle backpack already on her back, because Sophie wore her backpack first thing in the morning, like other people put on a robe. And she stopped and looked at the 2 adults at the kitchen table, and the 2 plates, and the 2 coffee cups, and said, with great satisfaction, as if something she'd predicted had come true, "Good, you're both here." Cole looked at his daughter. "Good morning to you, too." "Is there eggs?" "Yes." "With the pepper?" "Sophie, I'm asking so I know whether to be excited or just regular." She came to the table and climbed into her chair and looked at Victoria. "How's your lip?" "Better." "Can I see?" "Sophie," Cole said. "What? I want to know if the ice worked. We used the frozen peas. I told Daddy we should use the ice pack from the first aid kit, but he said the peas conform to the shape better, and I'm still deciding if he's right." "The peas worked well," Victoria said. Sophie considered this with the gravity of someone updating a hypothesis. "Okay," she said. "I'll give him that one." She looked at the legal pad. "What are you writing?" "Sophie, it's okay," Victoria said. She looked at the girl. "Do you know what the word evidence means?" Sophie sat up straighter. She liked being asked real questions. Like proof? Like when you find footprints and you know someone was there? Exactly like that. I'm making a list of proof. Proof of what? That someone did something wrong. Sophie thought about this. The man from the airport? Yes. The girl's expression shifted, not into fear, but into something more focused. A particular kind of serious that looked, Cole had always thought, exactly like her mother's serious. It appeared when Sophie had made a decision that she was going to see something through. Good, Sophie said simply. He should get in trouble. That's the plan, Victoria said. Do you need help? Sophie, Cole said, not without warmth. I'm good at finding things, Sophie said, unapologetically. Last year, I found Daddy's car keys in the cereal box, and nobody else even looked there. Victoria looked at Cole. There's a context to that story, he said. There is not a good context, Sophie said serenely. The keys were in the cereal box, Daddy. He gave her his office. It wasn't much. A room off the garage with a desk and a decent internet connection, and shelves of automotive manuals and 2 framed photos. One of Sophie at about age 2, in a garden holding a tomato with both hands, like it was the greatest thing she'd ever seen. And one of a woman with dark eyes and a wide, unguarded smile, who had to be Maya. Cole didn't point out the photos. He just cleared some space on the desk and set her up, and said he'd be in the garage if she needed anything, and he left her to it. She called Daniel Rivera at 8:45 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd seen her name and chosen to answer, which meant he wasn't fully committed to the other side. Not yet. Victoria. His voice was careful, layered with the particular care of a man navigating something he didn't want to name directly. Daniel, we need to talk. This isn't a great time. It's the best time you're going to get. She kept her voice level, no heat, no urgency. Urgency made people defensive. She needed him thinking, not reacting. I was at Denver International yesterday. Edward Crane was there. Silence on the line, long enough to be information. I heard about that, Rivera said carefully. What did you hear? Another pause. That there was an incident. That it was... He stopped. Victoria, I'm not in a position to... Daniel, look me in the eye and tell me you've decided that what happened yesterday was acceptable. I wasn't there. I know you weren't there. I'm asking what you've decided it was. Because right now, you have 4 options. You can pretend it didn't happen, which means you've made a choice about what kind of man you are. You can decide I provoked it somehow, which means you've made a different choice about what kind of man you are. You can stay quiet and let Edward make his next move, which is also a choice. Or, she paused, or you can have coffee with me today and look at 14 months of financial documentation that I think you're going to find very clarifying. Silence. She waited. This was the thing she'd learned in 30 years of negotiation. The person who fills silence first has already lost something. She let the silence exist. She let him sit in it. She let it do its work. I have a meeting at 2, Rivera said finally. I can be done by noon. Another long pause. There's a place on Colfax, Juniper's. It's quiet on Sundays. I'll find it. She hung up and sat back in Cole's desk chair and let herself exhale. She heard the sound of an engine from the garage, something being started, warmed up, running through its paces. The steady, purposeful sound of something mechanical being brought back to working order. She turned and looked at the photo of Maya, the woman with the unguarded smile. She looked like someone who had never learned the particular armor Victoria had spent her whole adult life perfecting. And she looked, Victoria thought, like someone who had been entirely fine with that. She looked happy. Not successful, not powerful. Just genuinely, unguardedly happy. She looked at Maya's face in the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked down at her legal pad and picked up the pen and kept working. She told Cole about the meeting with Rivera while he was under a truck and she was in the doorway of the garage, watching him work with the ease of someone who had long ago made peace with the relationship between effort and result. "That's good," he said from under the chassis. "He might not show." "He'll show." "You don't know that. You got him talking." Cole's voice was slightly muffled, but clear. "A man who's fully committed to the other side doesn't pick up the phone. He saw your name. He answered. He's been looking for a reason. Or he's calling Edward right now to tell him I reached out." "Maybe." He rolled out from under the truck and looked at her. There was a streak of grease on his forearm, and he looked completely unconcerned about it. But if he was going to do that, he would have done it before he agreed to meet you. He agreed to meet you first. That's the tell. She looked at him. "You read people the way I read balance sheets," she said. "Different data, same skill." She turned the thought over. It was true. The essential thing was the same. Finding the pattern beneath the surface, reading what the numbers or the behavior were actually saying rather than what they appeared to say. She'd just never considered that a man with 12 years in special operations and a decade fixing engines might have had more practice at it than most of the MBAs she'd spent her career surrounded by. "I need a favor," she said. He waited. "I need to borrow your truck. I don't have a car here, and I'm not calling a corporate driver." "Keys are on the hook by the door," he said. "Just like that?" "Just like that." She looked at him for a moment. "You're very trusting for someone who met me yesterday." "I'm a decent judge of character," he said simply. "And Sophie likes you. Sophie's a better judge than I am." "She's 6. "Exactly. She hasn't learned to override her instincts yet." Victoria almost said something and then stopped. She shook her head once, very slightly, the way a person does when they've been given something they don't quite know how to hold. "I'll be back by 2, she said. "Sophie wants to show you how to play Uno when you get back." "I know how to play Uno." "Sophie's version has additional rules." "Of course it does." "Just a heads up," he said. He rolled back under the truck. She listened to him work for a moment, the particular quiet confidence of someone doing something they knew how to do. And then she went to get the keys. She drove out into the gray Denver morning, the truck old and honest and loud in the good way, the city spreading out around her in all its winter plainness. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her mind running ahead to Rivera and the documents and the 8 days left on the Hargrove clock. She drove past the airport on the interchange. She didn't look at it. She was almost at Colfax when her phone rang through the truck's Bluetooth. A number she didn't recognize, but with a Denver prefix she did. She answered. "Miss Sterling?" The voice was smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who'd had years of practice making the knife feel like a handshake. "I heard you had a productive morning." Her grip tightened on the wheel. "Edward," she said, "I also heard you've been making phone calls." A pause, precisely weighted. "I thought we understood each other." "We do," she said. "That's why I'm not signing anything." "Victoria." His voice shifted. Not angry, something colder than angry. The tone of someone recalculating. "You are not thinking clearly about what I can do." "You're right that I wasn't," she said. "I spent 14 months being careful about that. I don't think you need to worry about that anymore." Silence on the line. She kept her eyes on the road. "You want to do this the hard way," Edward said. "I want to do this the right way," she said. Those turned out to be the same thing. She ended the call. Her hands were steady on the wheel. She noted that was something that felt like surprise, and then something that felt like recognition. The feeling of a person arriving, after a long road, at the place they should have been all along. She found junipers on Colfax. She found a parking spot wide enough for the old truck. She got her wheelchair from the bed, assembled it with practiced efficiency, transferred, adjusted, straightened her jacket. Through the coffee shop window, she could see Daniel Rivera already seated, a cup in front of him, his hands wrapped around it, his face holding the complicated expression of a man who had something to say and wasn't sure yet who he was going to say it to. She watched him for a moment from the parking lot. Then she pushed the door open and went in. Daniel Rivera was a man who had learned to be comfortable in rooms where other people were not comfortable. That was part of what had made him good at his job for 20 years. The ability to sit across from difficult people in difficult conversations and project the particular stillness of someone who hadn't yet decided which way to fall. But when Victoria came through the door of Junipers and crossed the room toward him, he looked like a man who had been sitting with something heavy for a long time and was running out of places to put it. She got to the table. She didn't do the thing people sometimes did, the performative moment of settling in, arranging things, creating small delays before the real conversation. She put her hands on the table and looked at him directly. "You already know what I'm going to show you," she said. Rivera looked at his coffee, then at her. "Some of it," he said. "How much?" "Enough to know why you called." He turned the cup in his hands. "And enough to understand why I should have called you 8 months ago." She held his gaze. "Why didn't you?" "Because Edward was very convincing." He said it without defensiveness, like a man giving a factual account of his own failure. "He told me you'd become erratic, that the board was concerned, that there were things happening internally that I wasn't seeing from my position, and He stopped. "I believed him because it was easier than the alternative." "Which was?" "Which was believing that I'd been manipulated by a man I'd shaken hands with in good faith." He finally looked up. "I'm on your board, Victoria. I've been on your board for 6 years. Your father appointed me. And I sat in a room with Edward Crane and let him rewrite the story of who you are because he was very good at telling it." The honesty of it, unvarnished, straight, was not what she'd expected. She'd expected the careful language of a man protecting himself. This was something else. "Tell me what he told you," she said. "He said you were mentally deteriorating, that the stress of the merger had exposed, his word, vulnerabilities. He said there were concerns about your judgment, about the decisions you'd been making about the Hargrove data integration. He said the medical liability alone was enough to bring the whole company down if you stayed in the chair." He paused. He used the word chair very specifically, like the physical thing and the leadership thing were the same issue. He was very careful about it. Deniable, but clear. Victoria felt something cold move through her, deliberate and measured. The specific kind of cold that comes not from surprise, but from confirmation. She'd suspected this. She'd built the shape of it in her mind from fragments and second-hand signals. But hearing it said plainly by a man who had been in the room was different from suspecting it in the dark at 3 a.m. "He's been running that play for 14 months, she said. "I know that now." "What changed?" Rivera was quiet for a moment. "Yesterday," he said, "at the airport. You saw the video. Half the board saw the video. Someone posted it. It was online for 40 minutes before Edward's people had it pulled." He met her eyes. But 40 minutes was long enough. "What did the board do with it?" Arthur Whitmore called it an unfortunate misunderstanding and suggested we all focus on the merger timeline. Rivera's voice had an edge to it now. Chen said nothing. Patel said nothing. And I sat in that call and listened to three men I respect describe a video of our CEO being knocked to the floor of an airport and bleeding as an optics problem. He set the coffee cup down with a quiet, controlled firmness. That was when I understood exactly what I'd allowed to happen. She studied him. 14 months of not fully trusting this man. 14 months of watching him keep his distance and wondering what it meant, and deciding it meant he'd chosen the other side. And here he was, with the particular expression of a man who had been wrong and was willing to say so, which in her experience was rarer than almost any other quality. She opened her bag and took out the folder. It was not the complete documentation. She had that on the encrypted drive back in Cole's office. This was the distillation. 30 pages. The essential pattern. 3 years of financial movements, each individual transaction unremarkable, the aggregate undeniable. She slid it across the table. Rivera opened it. He read the first page in silence. Then the second. Halfway through the third page, she watched his expression change. Not dramatically, not with shock or alarm, but with the slow, irrevocable shift of a person updating a fundamental understanding. Like a building settling into a new position. He turned to page 7 without looking up. Then page 12. "This is embezzlement," he said. "Yes." "This is 4 years of it." 3 years and 8 months. "Do you have the underlying transactions?" "All of them. Encrypted backup, 2 independent locations. Digital forensics expert has been under NDA for 6 weeks reviewing the documentation. Her preliminary report is in there." She tapped the folder. "Page 24. He turned to page 24. He read it. He turned back to page 7 and cross-referenced something. He was thorough. She'd always known that about him. Had filed it away as a quality even during the months she'd been uncertain about where he stood. "He has 3 board members," Rivera said. "Yes. And the 4th vote against you would need to be me," she said. "He needs my cooperation or my removal. The merger can't close without a clear CEO decision on the Hargrove Data Integration Framework. That's in the original terms. It was written in specifically to protect against a hostile takeover play. Ironically." She let the irony sit there for a moment. "Edward helped write those terms. 2 years ago, when he still thought I'd be useful to him. He assumed he'd have you controlled by now." "He assumed wrong." Rivera closed the folder. He pressed his hand flat on top of it and looked at her. And for the first time in 8 months, there was nothing between his eyes and hers but the truth of the situation. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Monday's meeting," she said. "I need to be in that room. Edward will have you blocked. He'll claim you're a liability, bring up the incident at the airport as evidence of instability. Then I need to be there before he can make that move. I need the meeting called early. Sunday." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "I can call a special board session for cause. If I cite the preliminary forensics report as a governance matter, the other members are legally obligated to attend." He was already thinking it through. She could see him working it, the same way she worked a problem. Methodical and fast. "Edward will know something's wrong the moment I send the notice. He'll have his lawyers on the phone within the hour." "I know. That gives you less than 24 hours. 24 hours is enough." "Victoria." "Daniel." She put her hands flat on the table. "I have been careful about this for 14 months. I have been patient, methodical, and careful. And yesterday I ended up on the floor of an airport because I miscalculated how long a man like Edward Crane can be patient when his timeline starts closing. I am done being careful in a way that only protects him." She held his eyes. "Send the notice tonight. Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Can you do it?" A long pause. Then Daniel Rivera nodded once. "I'll do it," he said. She picked up the folder and put it back in her bag. She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Not the performed corporate version, the real one, the kind that costs something." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We still have to get through Sunday." "We do." She left $20 on the table for the 2 coffees, turned her chair, and went back out into the gray February morning. She sat for a moment in the parking lot beside Cole's truck, the cold air on her face, her hands in her lap. She let the pieces of it move through her. What Rivera had said about the board call, about the video, about the word chair, used like a weapon in a conference room full of men who could stand up whenever they wanted. She had known, intellectually, that this was what Edward was doing. She had built the architecture of it in her mind across 14 months of careful watching. But knowing it and hearing it confirmed by a man who had been in the room were 2 different weights. She sat with the weight of it for 30 seconds, 45. Long enough to feel it, not long enough to let it root. Then she put the truck in gear and drove back to Cole's house. He was in the driveway when she pulled in, talking on his phone, and whatever the call was, it wasn't a comfortable one. She could read that from 20 feet. The way he was standing, the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness that meant his mind was working while his body went quiet. He was facing away from her, and she gave him the space of it, getting her chair from the truck bed and assembling it with the efficiency of long practice before he finished the call. He turned around as she settled in. "How was Rivera?" he said. "Better than expected." She studied his face. "What was that?" He looked at the phone in his hand for a moment, then at her. "My buddy Marcus. He runs a private security consulting firm out of Colorado Springs. We served together." "You called him about me?" "I called him about Edward Crane." He put the phone in his pocket. "Marcus runs background and threat assessment. I asked him to pull whatever was available on Crane's current operations." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because Edward called you this morning, on the road." She was very still. "How did you know about that?" "I didn't," he said simply. "I assumed. He's running an 8-day clock, and you reached out to Rivera, and he found out fast. A man like that doesn't wait." He held her gaze. "Was I wrong?" She exhaled slowly. "He called while I was driving to meet Rivera." "What did he say?" "That I wasn't thinking clearly about what he could do." She paused. "I told him I disagreed." Something moved in Cole's expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. The recognition of someone who had just received information they found satisfying. "Good," he said. His tone shifted. "He's recalculating." She turned toward the house. "Rivera is calling a special board session for Sunday morning. That's less than 24 hours. Edward is going to know within the hour, if he doesn't already." Cole held the front door open without comment, and she went through, and there was something about the complete lack of ceremony in the gesture. Not assistance, not performance, just a door held open for a person that she had to actively decline to find moving. Sophie was at the kitchen table with a book open in front of her that was clearly not holding her full attention, because the moment they came in, she looked up with the expression of a child who has been waiting and is not going to pretend she hasn't been. "How'd it go?" she asked. Cole looked at his daughter. "You know what how'd it go means in this context?" "Yes," Sophie said serenely. "Victoria went to talk to a man about the bad man from the airport. I'm asking how it went." "You explained the whole situation to her?" Victoria asked Cole. "She extrapolated," Cole said, with the resignation of a father who had long since stopped being surprised by his daughter's capacity for extrapolation. "It went well," Victoria said. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Okay. Do you want to learn Uno now? I have additional rules. I heard. Daddy thinks the additional rules are not real rules. Sophie's expression made clear her opinion on this. He is wrong. Sophie. He is. She looked at Victoria. The additional rules are written down. I have them on a piece of paper. That's how you know they're real. Victoria pulled herself up to the table. Show me the paper, she said. Sophie produced it from somewhere inside the turtle backpack, with the air of someone presenting evidence. It was a sheet of notebook paper, covered in careful 7-year-old printing, complete with illustrations. Victoria read it. She kept her face neutral throughout. Rule 5, she said. If you play a draw 4 on a birthday, the birthday person doesn't have to draw. It's only fair, Sophie said. When is your birthday, Sophie? Sophie paused. March 3rd? So not today. But it could be someone else's birthday. You don't know. That's true. Victoria set the paper down. Rule 7. If Gerald the goldfish is watching, no reverse cards. Cole, behind them at the counter, made a sound that was not entirely a cough. Gerald gets stressed by reversals, Sophie said. Does he? He does. She was completely serious. Daddy doesn't believe me about Gerald's feelings. But I know Gerald, and Daddy doesn't spend as much time with him. I spend plenty of time with Gerald, Cole said from the counter. You change his water. That's not quality time, Daddy. Victoria looked at the sheet of Uno rules in her hand, handwritten on notebook paper, with careful printing, and small illustrations of what appeared to be a goldfish looking anxious. She looked at Sophie, who was watching her with large, earnest eyes, waiting for her judgment on the additional rules. She thought about her apartment in Denver. The real one. The one she hadn't been back to since Thursday. 42 floors up, floor-to-ceiling glass. The city laid out below like a diagram of everything she'd worked for. Catered from a restaurant 3 blocks away when she ate at home, which was rarely. A housekeeper who came Tuesdays. A plant in the living room that she kept alive as a personal challenge, and nothing else. She thought about what the word home meant, and what it had meant for the last 11 years, and what it might mean in a life not organized entirely around proof. She set the paper down in front of Sophie. Rule 7 stands, she said, out of respect for Gerald. Sophie beamed. Cole said nothing, but she heard him stop pretending to cough. They played 2 rounds of Uno with the additional rules, and Gerald the goldfish watching from his bowl on the counter. And by the end of the second round, Sophie had won both and was explaining why this was fair and expected given her home territory advantage. And for 45 minutes, Victoria did not think about the merger, or Edward Crane, or the special board session, or the document folder in her bag. It was the first 45 minutes in 14 months that her mind had not been running the problem. She noted it the way you notice a sound that stops, by the sudden quality of the silence. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Diane Mercer, her assistant, the woman who had been with her for 9 years, who knew every inch of the company, who answered to the board as much as to Victoria, and had never, in 9 years, pretended otherwise. She excused herself and went to Cole's office and closed the door. Diane. Victoria. Diane's voice was professional and carefully empty, which meant she was somewhere she couldn't speak freely. I'm calling to let you know that there's been a special board session notice issued for Sunday at 10 a.m. I know. I requested it. A pause. You requested it? Flatly. Through Daniel Rivera, yes. Another pause, longer this time. Victoria, Edward Crane has been in contact with the office this afternoon. He asked me to remind you of your contractual obligations and to request that you confirm your attendance at Monday's original meeting in New York. Tell Edward I'll see him Sunday. Victoria, Diane, she kept her voice even. 9 years. You've been with me 9 years. In that time, have you seen anything in the company's financials that didn't add up to you? Silence. She waited. I have a file, Diane said quietly. I started keeping it 2 years ago. I didn't know what to do with it. Email it to the encrypted address you have for me, not the company's server. If Edward finds out, he's going to find out Sunday morning regardless. The question is whether you want to be on the right side of what happens after. A pause. You've been loyal, Diane, to the company, and I know who built that loyalty. But the company my father built is not what Edward Crane is trying to walk away with, and you know the difference. A long, careful silence on the other end of the line. The file will be in your encrypted inbox within the hour, Diane said. Thank you. She hung up and sat for a moment, looking at the photo of Maya on the shelf. The unguarded smile. The tomato photo of Sophie beside it, the little hands holding it like a prize. She heard Cole's voice from the kitchen, saying something quiet to Sophie, and Sophie's response, higher and animated, and the ordinary sound of an evening happening in a house where people actually lived. She turned back to her laptop and started working. Cole came to the door of the office at 7:30 and leaned against the frame. She'd been in there for 3 hours, and the legal pad was covered on both sides now, and the laptop screen had 4 windows open. Spaghetti, he said. I'm not done. You'll be better at it after you eat. She looked at the screen, then at him. 5 minutes, she said. Okay. He didn't move. You're going to stand there, she said. 5 minutes, he said. I'll count. She looked at him for a moment, with the expression she'd used to make junior partners reassess their life choices. It had no discernible effect on Cole Mitchell whatsoever. She closed the laptop. They ate spaghetti at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, the same table, the same chairs. Sophie explaining in great detail a disagreement she'd had with a boy named Marcus at school about whether dinosaurs would beat robots in a fight, and why the answer was obviously dinosaurs because robots needed charging and dinosaurs did not. And Cole saying he thought it depended heavily on the type of robot and the type of dinosaur, and the conversation becoming unexpectedly detailed and technical in a way that made Victoria realize, somewhere around the T-Rex versus battle drone debate, that she was entirely invested in the outcome. The T-Rex wins, she said. Sophie pointed at her. See, Daddy? The battle drone has a significant range advantage, Cole said. The T-Rex has teeth, Sophie said. Actual teeth. The drone doesn't need to get close enough for teeth to matter. But what if it does? That would be poor drone strategy. Sophie looked at Victoria. He always does this. He finds the one way to make the boring thing win. In my experience, Cole said, the boring thing wins more often than people expect. He looked at Victoria when he said it, and it wasn't about dinosaurs. She held his gaze for a moment. Not this time, she said. He considered that. No, he said. Not this time. After dinner, Sophie went to bed without being asked twice, unusual enough that Cole raised an eyebrow, and the house settled into its late-night quiet, and Victoria and Cole sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the legal pad between them, and she walked him through the Sunday plan. The board session, the forensics report, Diane's file, which had arrived in her encrypted inbox at 8:15 and was exactly what she'd hoped it was. A meticulous 9-year record of a careful woman who had seen things and written them down because she didn't know what else to do with what she knew. Cole listened. He asked precise questions at precise moments. He didn't offer opinions about things he didn't understand, and he didn't pretend to follow when she went deep into the corporate governance mechanics. But when she got to the part about the 4 board members and the vote threshold, and what happened if Edward challenged the session's legitimacy, he said, He'll come after the session itself before he argues the evidence. She looked up. He needs to stop the meeting from happening, Cole continued, not win the argument inside it. If he can get an injunction claiming the session was improperly called, he buys himself until Monday, and Monday he controls the room. She went still. His lawyers, she said. He's had them since this afternoon. You said it yourself. He knows you have Rivera. He knows you're moving. His first move isn't to fight the evidence. It's to prevent the evidence from getting in front of the right people. He met her eyes. How solid is the legal basis for Rivera's session call? She reached for her phone and called a number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She tried again. On the second attempt, a man's voice, groggy and immediately alert. Victoria. Paul, I need 30 minutes. Paul Chen, not the board member, her corporate attorney of 7 years, said, It's 10 o'clock at night. I know. A beat. 30 minutes, he said. I'll call you back from my office line. She hung up. She looked at Cole. Good catch, she said. What's the exposure? I don't know yet. Rivera cited a governance matter under Section 12 of the corporate charter. That should be clean. But Edward's lawyers will find something to argue if there's anything to find. And if Paul tells me the session has a procedural vulnerability, then you fix it tonight. Then I fix it tonight. She exhaled. You should sleep. You have nothing to do with any of this, and you've already... I'm fine. Cole. I'm fine, he said again. Not dismissive, certain. The particular certainty of someone who had decided where they were going to be and didn't need to re-examine the decision. She looked at him. This man who had stepped in at gate B42 because his daughter asked a question. Who had given her a room and a desk and the keys to his truck without ceremony or condition. Who listened and asked good questions and didn't fill silence with performance. Why are you doing this? She said. The real answer, not the one about Sophie. He looked at her. Because I've seen what happens when nobody does, he said quietly. I've stood in places where the difference between someone stepping in and someone looking away was the entire story. I have looked away when I shouldn't have. I know what that feels like to carry. He held her eyes. I'm not doing that again for the rest of my life. For any reason. She held his gaze and felt something that had been armored for a very long time consider, tentatively, the possibility of setting the armor down. Her phone rang. Paul Chen, from his office line. She answered it. She looked at Cole as she did, and he picked up his coffee and settled back in his chair with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. And she started explaining the problem to her lawyer. The clock on the kitchen wall said 10:14 p.m. Sunday was 15 hours and 46 minutes away. Paul Chen talked for 22 minutes, and in that time confirmed 2 things. The first was that Rivera's session call under Section 12 was procedurally clean, solid enough that any injunction attempt would take longer to file than the meeting would take to happen. The second was that Edward's lawyers had already contacted the Hargrove board directly, advising them that Sunday's session was unauthorized, and that any decisions made in it would be subject to legal challenge. Which meant Edward already knew, which meant the 24 hours had just gotten shorter. She thanked Paul, hung up, and looked at Cole. He went to Hargrove directly, she said. Bypassed the board session entirely. If Hargrove gets cold feet about Sunday's legitimacy and pulls their representative from the meeting, the session collapses. No quorum. She was already calculating. He doesn't need to win the argument. He just needs to make the room uncertain enough that the right people don't show up. Can he do that? Their general counsel has been nervous about this merger for 2 months. He doesn't need much convincing. She reached for her phone again. Cole's hand came down gently on her wrist, not stopping her, just a pause. "It's after 10:30, he said. "I know. Who are you calling?" "Margaret Osei. She's Hargrove's board chair. She and my father were colleagues for 30 years. She looked at him. She's been watching this merger get pushed and pulled for 6 months. She deserves a direct conversation. Cole lifted his hand. She dialed. Margaret Osei answered on the 3rd ring with the alertness of someone who had been waiting for this call, or one very much like it. "Victoria," she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." "You've heard from Edward's lawyers." 2 hours ago. They were very thorough. A pause. They were also very careful about what they didn't say. What didn't they say? They didn't say why you called the Sunday session yourself. They presented it as a hostile legal maneuver. They did not address why a CEO with nothing to hide would need a hostile legal maneuver. Margaret's voice was measured, precise, the voice of a woman who had built her own empire, one careful sentence at a time. "I've known you since you were 11 years old, Victoria. Your father brought you to our conference in Boston. You sat in the back row and took notes on a legal pad the whole day. You were the only child in the room." "I remember that." "You were taking notes on a legal pad this week, too, I imagine." "Yes." "Then tell me what's on them." Victoria told her. Not everything, not the granular detail, but the essential truth of it. The embezzlement, the pattern, the timeline, the board members, the forensics report, the 8 days, and what Edward had done with them, and why. Margaret listened without interruption. When Victoria finished, the silence lasted long enough to be considered. "Send me the preliminary forensics report tonight," Margaret said. "The executive summary. I'll have our counsel review it before 9 a.m. "If your counsel needs, my counsel will have what they need," Margaret said crisply. "Our general counsel is nervous. You're right about that. But I am not our general counsel. I am the board chair, and I have 30 years of experience distinguishing between a man protecting a legitimate interest and a man protecting himself." A beat. "Be in that room Sunday morning, Victoria." "I intend to be." "And Victoria," Margaret's voice shifted slightly, losing some of its boardroom precision, gaining something else. "How are you?" The question caught her. She held the phone and looked at the kitchen table, and the coffee cups, and Cole sitting across from her with that steady, unhurried presence. "Better than yesterday," she said honestly. "Good." Margaret hung up. Victoria set the phone down. She sat with the quiet of it for a moment. "She'll hold," Cole said. Not a question. "She'll hold." Victoria exhaled. "Edward doesn't know about Margaret. He's been working the board and the lawyers and the Hargrove middle management. He never considered that I'd go directly to the chair." She paused. "That was his mistake. He spent 2 years thinking about who I am inside the company. He forgot about who I am outside it." Cole nodded slowly. "He built a picture of you that made sense to him. That's different from knowing you." She thought about what Rivera had said in the coffee shop. The word chair used as a weapon in a conference room. The story Edward had been building, piece by careful piece, for 14 months. The picture of a woman made small and unstable by the very things that had required the most strength to survive. He had taken every real thing about her and arranged it to look like damage. She felt, sitting at Cole's kitchen table at 10:45 on a Saturday night, something she had not felt in 14 months of careful maneuvering. She felt like the ground was under her feet. Not the company, not the title, not the empire built from her father's vision and her decade of proof. Something more fundamental than all of that. Herself. Just herself. On solid ground. "I need to write the opening statement for tomorrow morning," she said. "Then write it." He stood up. "I'll get more coffee." She opened her laptop. She wrote until 1 in the morning. Cole stayed up until midnight, not hovering, not watching, just present in the house. The way the lights being on makes a house feel different from empty. He refilled her coffee once without being asked. He said nothing that needed saying. When he finally said goodnight and went down the hall, she barely looked up, but she was aware of it, the way you're aware of warmth until it moves away. She finished the statement at 1:14 a.m. She read it twice, changed 2 words, and sent it to Paul Chen with a note to review for anything legally problematic before 8 a.m. Then she sat in the quiet office and listened to the house and looked at Maya's photograph and thought about what it meant that the most honest conversation she'd had in years had happened at a kitchen table over spaghetti with a 6-year-old and a man she'd met 36 hours ago. She went to bed at 1:30. She slept. Not long. 4 hours, maybe 4.5. But real sleep. The kind that actually does something. And when she woke at 6 a.m., the gray Denver light was coming through the window. And for the first 10 seconds, she didn't remember where she was. And then she did. And something about that, the remembering, the safety of what she remembered, let her lie there for a moment without immediately reaching for her phone. Sophie was already awake. She could hear her in the kitchen, explaining something to Gerald in the focused, one-sided tone of someone delivering important news. Victoria got up. They had breakfast, the 3 of them, and Cole was quiet in the way he'd been from the beginning. Present, unhurried, the stillness of someone who understood the difference between a useful word and an empty one. Sophie ate her toast and told Victoria that she had decided Gerald was rooting for them, based on his swimming patterns. "How do you read swimming patterns?" Victoria asked. "You have to know him," Sophie said seriously. "When Gerald swims in circles, he's thinking. When he goes to the top of the water, he's worried. Right now he's swimming in circles, which means he's thinking good thoughts. How is that different from worried thinking?" Sophie considered this. "Direction," she said. "Worried circles are tighter." Cole stood up and took his plate to the sink and said, without turning around, "She's not wrong about Gerald." Victoria looked at the goldfish in the bowl on the counter. Gerald was, in fact, making wide, unhurried laps. "Okay," she said. "I'll take that." At 8:15, Paul Chen called. The opening statement was clean. He had one suggested revision on the governance language in the 3rd paragraph. She took it. He told her he'd be at the meeting, and she thanked him and hung up. At 8:40, Rivera called. All 5 board members had confirmed. Even Whitmore, whose confirmation had come at 8:38, with a terseness that communicated neither support nor opposition, just legally obligated presence. Hargrove's board chair was sending their general counsel and a representative. Margaret had made the call herself, Rivera said, and the general counsel had apparently stopped arguing approximately 2 minutes into that conversation. At 9:15, she was dressed in the clothes she'd had since Saturday. She'd washed them the night before, and they were clean, if not perfect. Her hair pulled back, her posture the one she'd developed over years of making rooms take her seriously before she said a word. She looked at herself in the mirror of the small bathroom and noted, with something that was not quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it, that she looked exactly like who she was. Her lip had faded to a bruise. She considered it for a moment. She left it uncovered. Cole was in the driveway with the truck keys when she came out. He held them out. "I can drive myself," she said. "I know." He put the keys in her hand. Then he said, "I have a friend, Marcus. I mentioned him. He's going to be in the parking lot of the building during the meeting." She looked at him. "You think Edward—" "I think Edward is cornered and has 8 days left and made poor decisions in a crowded airport when he still had options." He held her gaze. Marcus is just going to be in the parking lot. That's all. She understood the geometry of what he was saying, without the dramatics. "Tell Marcus thank you," she said. "Tell him yourself. He says he's heard you're worth the drive." She almost smiled. She put the keys in her lap. She looked up at him standing in the morning light in his work boots and his gray Henley, with the patience of a man who had stood in much harder places than this and waited much harder things out. "Cole," she stopped. Tried again. "I've been running alone for a long time. I'm not very good at this." "At what?" "At," she gestured slightly, at the space between them. "People." He looked at her for a moment. "You're better at it than you think," he said. "Sophie has an instinct about people. She's been right every single time in her life." "She's 6. "She's never been wrong." Victoria looked at the truck keys in her hand. She thought about 6 marshmallows, about the Uno rules handwritten on notebook paper, about Gerald's swimming patterns, about the particular quality of silence in this house, which was not the silence of absence, but the silence of things being exactly as they were meant to be. "When this is over," she said carefully, "I'd like to have dinner again. If Sophie would." "Sophie would very much," Cole said. She nodded once. He stepped back. She drove. The building that housed Sterling Medical's Denver offices was 30 years old, which her father had always considered a virtue. He'd never trusted glass towers. She pulled into the parking garage and sat for a moment. She could see a dark SUV near the exit, with a man in it she didn't recognize. The man lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a brief, casual acknowledgement. "Marcus." She lifted 2 fingers back. Then she went up. The conference room on the 14th floor was the kind of room that had seen real decisions and wasn't trying to pretend otherwise. Paul Chen was already there, with a woman she didn't know, who had the compact, prepared energy of a forensic accountant. Rivera was there, with a stillness that communicated what she needed to know about his state of mind. The Hargrove General Counsel, a man named Price, who had the thoroughly exhausted look of someone who had been argued at by Margaret Osei at 8 a.m. and had not yet fully recovered, sat to the left. Whitmore came in at 5 to 10 and sat at the far end of the table and looked at his phone. Chen and Patel arrived together and sat close to each other in the specific way that people sit when they've already agreed on what they're going to do and are trying to project neutrality. She noted it and filed it. At 2 minutes to 10, the door opened. Edward Crane walked in. He was perfectly dressed. Of course he was. He looked around the room with the measured scan of a man doing a rapid calculation, and when his eyes found Victoria at the head of the table, he went very still for exactly 1 second. She watched the second pass. He recovered. He smiled. The particular smile of a man deciding to project confidence he was no longer certain he possessed, and took his seat. His own attorney sat beside him and opened a leather portfolio without looking up. "Interesting venue for a Sunday morning," Edward said pleasantly. "I appreciate everyone making time," Victoria said. She kept her voice level, unhurried, the voice she'd spent 30 years calibrating for exactly this kind of room. "I'll be brief about why we're here, and then we'll go through the documentation." "I want to note for the record," Edward's attorney said, "that this session's legitimacy under Section 12 has been reviewed and confirmed by corporate counsel," Paul Chen said, sliding the copy of the legal memo to every seat at the table simultaneously, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had prepared for this objection. "You'll find the analysis on page 2. Edward's attorney opened the memo. He read the first paragraph. Something in his expression shifted very slightly. Edward did not look at the memo. He looked at Victoria. She looked back at him. She thought about the airport floor, the cold tile, his shoe on her wrist, the sound of 30 phones and not one voice. She thought about Sophie's tissues pressed into her hand with the grave generosity of a 6-year-old who had decided that was what needed doing. She thought about what her father had said. This company is your inheritance and your purpose and your identity. And about the long work of understanding what she was when it wasn't. "Let's begin," she said. She opened the folder. The forensic summary was 8 pages. She went through it methodically, not rushing, letting each page land. She watched the faces around the table the way she'd learned to watch faces, the micro-expressions, the small recalibrations, the moments when a person's eyes stopped moving because they'd landed on something that changed the architecture of what they'd believed. Whitmore reached page 4 and stopped pretending to check his phone. Patel reached page 6 and stopped looking at Chen. Edward's attorney, at page 7, wrote something on his portfolio in small, tight letters and slid it to Edward without comment. Edward did not pick it up. He was looking at the far wall with the expression of a man who had arrived at the conclusion he'd been delaying for some time. Price, the Hargrove General Counsel, finished the executive summary, set it down, and said, "Ms. Sterling, did this data network integration, the aspect of the Hargrove merger under discussion, did it have exposure to any of these accounts?" "No," she said. "The integration was clean. The embezzlement was entirely isolated in the Sterling corporate structure. The Hargrove acquisition itself has always been sound. What wasn't sound was the manner in which it was being structured and who was set to benefit from the restructuring." She looked at Price directly. "The merger your board agreed to is not the merger that was going to close." Price looked at Edward. Edward said nothing. "I want to address something directly," Victoria said. She looked around the table. At Whitmore. At Chen and Patel. At Rivera, who met her eyes steadily. "I know what story has been told about me in this room. I know about the word unstable. I know about the word vulnerable. I know every specific and deliberate way that story was constructed, and by whom, and why." She kept her voice even. No heat, no accusation, just fact. "I'm not going to tell you what to believe about me. I'm going to ask you to look at the evidence in front of you and make the decision you were appointed to this board to make." She set her hands flat on the table. "That's it. That's all I'm asking." The room was quiet. Then Arthur Whitmore, who had been on the board for 11 years and who had always, in Victoria's assessment, been a follower looking for the safest direction to move. Arthur Whitmore looked at Edward Crane for a long moment, and then he looked away. It was a small thing, a shift of the eyes lasting maybe 2 seconds. But in a room full of people who understood what it meant, it was the entire story. Edward Crane felt it. She could see him feel it. The particular moment when a man who has been holding a room understands that the room is no longer his. He looked at Victoria. She looked back at him. She held his gaze the way she had not been able to hold it on the airport floor, with her lip bleeding and his shoe on her wrist. She held it the way the woman she'd spent 11 years becoming knew how to hold it. He looked away first. His attorney leaned toward him and said something very quietly. Edward listened. He straightened his jacket. He stood up. "I'll be in contact with counsel," he said, to no one specific, to the room in general, in the voice of a man using words as furniture to fill space while he constructed his exit. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the frame and stopped. He turned back just slightly, just enough to look at her one more time. She waited. He left. The door closed behind him. Price broke the silence first. On behalf of the Hargrove Board, he said, I think we should discuss the merger terms as originally structured, the real ones. I agree, Rivera said. Victoria looked at the empty doorway for just a moment longer. She thought about 8 days and 14 months, and the cold tile of a terminal floor, and the particular sound a door makes when the right person finally walks through it. She turned back to the room. Let's talk, she said. The meeting lasted 3 hours and 14 minutes. By the end of it, the Hargrove merger terms had been restructured from the ground up. The original framework Victoria had spent 8 months building before Edward started dismantling it, restored with the modifications that Price and his team had actually wanted all along, but had been quietly discouraged from raising. The embezzlement documentation had been formally entered into the board record. Paul Chen had a meeting with the Colorado Attorney General's office scheduled for Tuesday morning, and Arthur Whitmore, on his way out the door, stopped beside Victoria's chair and said, without looking at her directly, in the voice of a man delivering the minimum required acknowledgement, "The company is in better hands than I understood." He didn't apologize. She didn't expect him to. Some men could acknowledge a truth without being able to look it in the eye, and that was its own kind of limitation. She nodded once and let him go. Rivera was the last board member left in the room. He stood by the window while Paul Chen and the forensics accountant packed up, and when they'd gone, he turned to Victoria with the expression of a man who had something to say and was deciding how to say it. "Your father would be proud," he said finally. She considered that for a moment, the weight of it, the complicated geography of it. "My father would be relieved," she said. "Proud of himself, probably, for building something worth saving." She looked at the empty table. "I think I need to be proud of myself for different reasons." Rivera studied her. "Different how?" "He built it. I held it." She paused. "I want to build something now, something that's mine, not a defense of what already existed, something with a forward direction." She looked at him. "Starting with a diagnostics access program we shelved 18 months ago because it didn't move the needle on quarterly margins. That program cost, I know what it cost. I approved the original budget." She held his gaze. "I also know that my father started this company to give people access to medical diagnostics they couldn't afford, not to generate margins. We lost the thread somewhere, and I helped lose it, and I'd like to find it again." Rivera was quiet for a moment. Then something in his expression settled, the way a man's expression settles when he remembers why he took a job in the first place. "I'll support it," he said. She drove back to Cole's house in the Sunday afternoon quiet, the truck moving through streets that looked the same as they had that morning and felt entirely different. The sky had gone from gray to a pale, washed-out blue, the kind of blue that February offers occasionally, as proof that it knows spring exists. She drove with one hand on the wheel, and her mind doing something it rarely did. Not running forward, not calculating the next problem, not building the architecture of the next defense. Just being in the moment she was in. She pulled into Cole's driveway and sat in the truck for a moment. Through the front window, she could see the light on in the kitchen. She could see, faintly, Sophie at the kitchen table, with what appeared to be a very large sheet of paper and markers. She went in. Sophie looked up the moment the door opened, with the expression of someone who had been waiting and had been practicing not looking like it. "Well?" she said. "Sophie," Cole started, from somewhere behind the kitchen counter. "She was gone all morning," Sophie said. "That means something important happened. I'm asking what." Victoria came to the table. She looked at the large sheet of paper. Sophie had been drawing what appeared to be a courtroom scene, except the judge was a dinosaur, and one of the lawyers appeared to be Gerald the goldfish in a tiny suit. "We won," Victoria said. Sophie put both hands flat on the table and looked at her with enormous eyes. We? We, Victoria said. Sophie looked at her father. Cole was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who already knew the answer and had been waiting to see it confirmed. Gerald helped, Sophie said firmly. Gerald's contribution will be noted, Victoria said. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and turned back to her drawing with renewed energy. Cole pushed off the counter and came to the table. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't make a speech about it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and said, "How do you feel?" She thought about it, actually thought about it, instead of reaching for the automatic answer. "Like I set something down that I've been carrying a very long distance," she said. "And I'm not sure yet what my hands are going to do without it." He looked at her. "What do you want them to do?" It was such a direct question, such a simple, direct question that nobody had asked her in so long that she almost didn't have the vocabulary for an honest answer. "Something worth doing," she said. "Something that matters to people beyond the margins column." "The diagnostics program," he said, not a question. She looked at him. "Rivera mentioned it to you?" "You mentioned it," he said, "last night, when you were going through the legal pad at midnight and thinking out loud. You probably didn't realize you were doing it." She hadn't realized. She sat with that for a moment. The fact that somewhere in the late-night work of building her case, she had been thinking aloud in this kitchen about what she actually wanted. And this man had been listening without making it a thing. "There are rural communities in 3 states that were going to be in the first phase of the program," she said. "People who drive 90 miles to a diagnostic center, or don't go at all. We had the infrastructure built. We shelved it." She looked at her hands on the table. "I signed off on shelving it because I was fighting 14 other battles, and I told myself I'd come back to it." "Come back to it," Cole said. "I'm going to." She paused. "First, I have to deal with the corporate restructuring, and the board resolution, and the press, which is going to be unpleasant. Edward will put out a story. Edward will put out multiple stories. His lawyers are very good at the narrative version of what happened." She met his eyes. "But the forensics report is going to the AG's office Tuesday morning, and the board minutes from today are a matter of corporate record. He can tell his story. The documents tell a different one." Cole nodded. "And the merger?" "Closes on the 15th, as scheduled. Clean terms. Hargrove gets the integration they actually wanted, and Sterling Medical gets the capital structure it needed without the side arrangement that was going to benefit one man's offshore accounts." She paused. Price shook my hand on the way out. He looked like a man who had just been allowed to exhale. Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Is the bad man going to jail?" "Sophie," Cole said. "I'm just asking what happens next." "That's for the courts to decide," Victoria said. "But the evidence is strong." Sophie considered this with the judicial gravity of someone who had strong personal feelings about the matter. "Good," she said, and returned to her drawing. "Gerald thinks so too." "Gerald is very engaged in this," Victoria observed. "Gerald was there from the beginning," Sophie said. "Emotionally, he deserves updates." Cole looked at the ceiling briefly, then at Victoria. She caught the look and held it for half a second. And the thing that passed between them in that half second was so quietly understood that neither of them needed to do anything with it. Just held it and let it be what it was. She stayed for dinner again. It was the most natural thing. There was no discussion about it, no formal invitation. Sophie simply set 3 places at the table, as if the question had already been answered by people more reasonable than the adults in the room. And Cole made chicken this time, and the conversation moved from Gerald's emotional journey through the weekend to Sophie's ongoing position in the dinosaur versus robot debate, to a story Cole told about a deployment in 2009 that he told carefully, with things left out, but with the shape of it intact. The shape of men who trusted each other in darkness, and what that trust had cost, and what it had built. Victoria listened. She didn't offer equivalencies or comparisons. She listened the way she'd learned over these 3 days that this man deserved to be listened to, fully, without running the response in the background, without measuring the information for strategic value. Just listening because what he was saying mattered, and he was saying it to her. Later, after Sophie had been put to bed and the kitchen was clean, they sat on the front steps because the night had gone unexpectedly mild for February. One of those brief, disorienting warmths that Colorado produces without warning, like the weather forgetting what month it is. Victoria had her phone in her lap. She'd been looking at it intermittently all evening. Cole had not asked about it. "My board chair called while I was driving back," she said. "My actual board chair, not the interim. She wants to discuss a transition plan." "Transition to what?" "That's what the discussion is about." She looked at the quiet street. "The company needs a different kind of leadership going forward. Someone who can manage the merger integration, handle the public restructuring, navigate the regulatory environment." She paused. "Someone whose full attention can be on that." "And yours can't." "My attention wants to be on the diagnostics program." She was quiet for a moment. "I spent 30 years proving I could run what my father built. And I can. I've done it. I've run it well, even when it was trying to run me out." She looked at him. "I think I've been holding on because letting go felt like losing. Like admitting the chair won, or the board won, or Edward won. Like the thing I sacrificed to build it was wasted if I set it down. But I think the bravest version of this, the version that actually means something, is doing the thing I want to do instead of the thing that still has something to prove." She exhaled. "That is much easier to say than to feel." He was quiet for a moment. "When I got out of the Navy," he said, "I thought the garage was me giving up. 12 years of operations, of training, of being the kind of person who runs toward the thing everyone else runs from. And then I'm rotating tires in Colorado." He looked at the street. "It took me about 2 years to understand that I didn't leave that life because I couldn't do it anymore. I left it because I had Sophie, and a life that was asking me to be present in a way that job couldn't allow." He paused. "Choosing what you love is not the same thing as losing what you were." She held that. She held it the way you hold something that is exactly the right shape for the space it needs to fill. "You're good at that," she said. "At what?" "Saying the thing that's actually true." Maya used to say I had no talent for diplomatic dishonesty. A slight smile, small and real. I think she meant it as a warning. I took it as a compliment. Victoria looked at the sky. The stars above Denver were faint, too much city light, but they were there if you looked at the right part of the dark. "Tell me about her," Victoria said. It was a risk. She knew it was a risk. Some doors you don't knock on. But she was done being careful about the things that mattered. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She laughed at everything. Not like it was forced, like she found the world genuinely funny, including herself. She could be in the hardest conversation of her life and find the one absurd thing in it and just laugh." He paused. "She made everything lighter, not smaller, lighter. There's a difference." "She sounds like someone Sophie got a lot from." "All of it," he said. "Sophie got all of it." Something in his voice, not grief exactly, or not only grief. Something warmer than grief, and not unrelated to it. "I got to watch her be her mother's daughter every day. That's not nothing. No, Victoria said. That's everything. They sat in the mild February night and let the silence be what it was. Not empty, not heavy, just the natural quiet of two people who had arrived from very different directions at the same honest place. Victoria's phone lit up. She looked at it. A text from Paul Chen. AG's office confirmed Tuesday, 9 a.m. We're ready. She typed back. Thank you, Paul. She put the phone away. I need to find an apartment, she said. My current one is associated with a version of my life I'm retiring. 42 floors up, Cole said. She looked at him. You mentioned it, he said, last night, when you were thinking out loud. She shook her head slightly, the small, involuntary gesture of someone who keeps discovering that they've been more visible than they thought. Yes, 42 floors up, floor-to-ceiling glass, perfectly positioned to survey the empire. She paused. I want something closer to the ground. Denver has good neighborhoods, Cole said. A lot of them have gotten better in the last 10 years. Real neighborhoods, where people know each other. Sophie's school is in a good district, Victoria said, not quite casually. Cole turned and looked at her. She met his look directly, without armor, without the calculated composure of the boardroom. Just herself. The version that ate spaghetti at a kitchen table and argued dinosaur strategy and counted 6 marshmallows in a mug and felt the thing behind the wall come carefully, cautiously, to the wall. That is true, Cole said. I'm just noting it, she said. Relevant data. Noted, he said. The warmth in his eyes. Steady. Real. The warmth of someone who had been watching carefully and had arrived at a conclusion he trusted. Was not a small thing. She held it the same way she'd held the other things this weekend that didn't have a category in her previous life. She held it like it was real. Because it was. She went back inside at 10 o'clock. She had calls in the morning, and a board call in the afternoon, and a press statement to review by Tuesday. The work was not over. The work was, in many ways, just beginning. Because dismantling something corrupt was considerably more exhausting than building something clean. And building the diagnostics program back from scratch was going to take everything she had and several things she'd have to learn. She had 3 missed calls from journalists she didn't know, and 2 from journalists she did. She had an email from the CEO of a competing medical firm asking to connect, which she filed under Motivations Unclear. She had an email from Margaret Osei that said only, Well done, Victoria. Your father would be surprised. That is the better compliment. She sat at Cole's kitchen table one last time and answered the emails that needed answering and left the ones that could wait. And it was somewhere in that hour that she understood what was different. Not the merger, not Edward's exit, not the board or the forensics or the clean terms on the Hargrove deal. What was different was that she was sitting at this table, thinking about the diagnostics program and the 3 states and the people who drove 90 miles and sometimes didn't go at all. And she was not thinking about it as a thing to defend or prove. She was thinking about it as a thing to build. Just to build. Because it was worth building. Because people needed it. Because that was, somewhere under 30 years of empire and proof and armor, the reason she had ever wanted any of this. She heard Cole's door open and close down the hall. The house settled. She closed her laptop. She sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment, in the house that smelled like cedar and spaghetti, and the particular safety of a place where real life was actually being lived. And she felt something complete inside her chest. Not finished, not resolved in the tidy sense, but complete the way a compass is complete. Pointing somewhere. Pointing clearly. In the morning, She would start making calls. She would begin the process of transitioning the CEO role to someone who could carry the merger integration with full attention while she turned hers toward the program that had been waiting for her. She would call Margaret back, and she would tell the board what she was building, and she would start the real work of understanding what the company was supposed to be before the empire got in the way. And Sophie would come to the kitchen in SpongeBob pajamas with her turtle backpack already on, and Cole would make coffee, and Gerald would swim his thoughtful, unhurried circles. And Victoria Sterling, who had been knocked to the floor of Gate B42 on a Saturday afternoon and had gotten back up, not because no one helped her, but because someone finally did, would sit at that table and understand, in the clearest, most unguarded way she had ever understood anything, that the life worth fighting for was not the one she had been protecting. It was this one, the one she was building now. She had spent 30 years proving she could survive. It turned out survival was just the beginning. The real work was deciding what you built in the space that opened up when you finally stopped just trying to hold the line and started asking what you wanted to stand for instead. She got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. She slept without the armor on, and for the first time and longer than she could clearly remember, that was enough. That was everything.